welcome everyone to our Portals of Innovation latest webinar. My name is Luis Nieves Ruiz, and I'm currently the Director of Economic Development for the Central Florida Regional Planning Council. So today we are doing our last webinar of the year. We're going to be discussing the Regional Integrated Climate Action Plan that's been prepared for our team with the resiliency section. Through the Portal Innovation Series, we have been able to highlight some of the outstanding work that ECF-R2C is doing on behalf of the region. So our first speaker will be Jennifer Rupert. She's our Chief Resiliency Officer. She will be followed by Adrian Leghe from the Resilience Sustainability Manager, and then Marie Press, a Resilience Sustainability Planner Coordinator. And I will be talking a little about our economic development part of the plan. So with no hesitation, Jennifer, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Louise. Thanks for coming, everyone. Welcome. I appreciate you all being here. If you could actually switch back to that other slide, just to review everything that we're going to go over today, we're going to talk about the vision and the framework that was established when the East Central Florida Regional Resilience Collaborative was established. Talk about the climate pollution reduction grant that accelerated our efforts with regards to completing a climate action plan. Talk a little bit about each section and portion of the plan as we develop it, the Integrated Climate Action Plan, the risk and vulnerability assessment, the greenhouse gas inventory, the projections and pathways that we laid out and that we were tasked to accomplish. Talk about the benefits briefly and the engagement we've conducted, and then as Luis had mentioned earlier, get into the economic and workforce impacts of all of these potential pathways that we've outlined. And at the end, of course, we'll be doing some Q&A with you all, which we always look forward to. So next slide, please. So back in about 2019, it was on the heels, I guess 17 maybe, the heels of Hurricane Irma, the collaborative idea or the concept was born, really with this vision to ensure a thriving and resilient future through comprehensive regional collaboration. Today we are 45 partners strong. Most of them, as you can tell with all these logos, are local governments. And if you can go to the next slide, Ken, please. We have a shared definition and vision of what resilience means for us in the region or for our partnership. It is the ability for us all to bounce forward, absorb, recover, and get better in the face of those short-term shocks and longer-term stressors. And at that time, the idea to bounce forward was really to learn from the mistakes or the impacts that we so often experience here in East Central Florida. So the team that worked on this really wanted that concept to bounce forward. So we work with this shared definition and this vision that was established by the initial steering committee put together. Next slide, please. Along with that, along with the shared definition, the steering committee was tasked in 2019 by our board to figure out what was the structure and the framework of this collaborative. What was it going to look like? So we work under this resilience umbrella on 3 different pillars, which is people, places, and prosperity. We have a comprehensive economic development strategy in the region that also utilizes those pillars, along with a number of other sustainability efforts that were happening in the region at that time that also uses these pillars as kind of the focus area of a lot of work that happens in the sustainability field. So for us, people meant the health and equity of the people that actually live here and work here. Of our places, it's the built infrastructure in our natural environment. For prosperity, it's our economic resilience. And our elected leadership at the time was adamant about adding in, we want to, throughout each one of those pillars, make sure we're reducing risk and vulnerability, as well as our carbon footprint, and then increase sustainability efforts region-wide. Next slide, please. Each one of the committees that were established at that time created a shared definition, if you will, of what they wanted to accomplish, and then laid out several goals, as you can see here, for our regional greenhouse gas inventory. This was a need that was identified or an area of substantive strategic concern. Therefore, the goals that they laid out for the R2C to establish were these that are laid out here. Develop a greenhouse gas inventory for the entire region, conducted in a way where each county could have their numbers and we would aggregate it to the regional scale. Make sure we can accelerate those efforts along while we were doing that with other local government partners. We want to engage the business community and so on and so forth, all the way through to the end where we've conducted a regional climate vulnerability assessment and an integrated climate action plan, which is what we're here to talk about today. Next slide, please. All of these goals and strategies that were established by each one of those committees really laid out the R2C Strategic Resilience Action Plan. And the action plan itself had a number of different items that we were to accomplish. Can you hit the next button again for me, Ken, please? You'll see in July of 2021, our council that we work with, which is made up of, our 8 counties and 78 cities. We have members that sit on our board that are elected leaders who are following along and really drive the effort as part of our structure. So in July 2021, the council adopted that Strategic Resilience Action Plan that you saw in the slide before, where we were told to basically put together an inventory for the region. In 2022, in March, they accepted the 2019 baseline inventory that we came up with. And as they were learning about what our greenhouse gases were, they started coming up with, hey, we're doing this in one city, we're doing this in another area, we're really working hard on this. And it really illustrated a lot of momentum that was already happening. And they asked us at that time to please put together some pathways or some common things that every municipality could accomplish in the region, which of course they were directing us to develop a climate action plan. So in 2022, we took that and started moving it forward to lay out the foundation of what that would look like. In August of 2023, the Environmental Protection Agency came out with the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant, and Orange, Osceola, and Seminole County had tapped the Regional Planning Council, or the R2C, to please continue the inventory we were doing and then further develop or accelerate our efforts to conduct the integrated climate action plan. And for us, that was wonderful to get that grant. We were already working on it, and this supported that long-term effort financially, which was wonderful. So just for a little bit of background, as we were developing this, what is a climate action plan, or what was the standard idea of what a climate action plan is? And according to the Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change, the climate action plan, as they define it globally, is a strategic framework for mitigated climate change by reducing greenhouse gas emissions and adapting to its impacts, requiring political commitment, science-based targets, detailed implementation steps, inclusive governance, and adequate financing and technology. Next slide, please. In March of 2024, we did send up our preliminary climate action plan to the EPA, which was one of those deliverables. And that really laid the foundation and groundwork for what would become our integrated climate action plan. So you see in this slide, we really expanded somewhat of a myopic view of what our climate action plan was going to look like. Of course, we would have in the middle section those climate and sustainable actions that climate action plans are known for, but we were going to take it really a step further and integrate what we were working with our emergency management with our emergency management directors in this region. So we incorporated a regional risk assessment that was already being conducted, and each one of these things was happening concurrently over a 5-year time frame, essentially. The third section that we'll be talking about is these conservation strategies that we were developing. We've done in 6 of our 8 counties at this point, and we currently are working on our 7th, where we're conducting mark sand modeling with each one of our really built from the bottom up with each one of our counties, and really identifying priorities as they are today for each one of these counties for conservation areas. And what does that look like? And what we're finding are some common threads that are coming out of each one of those conservation strategies is the highest priority include areas for water retention and wetlands and aquifer recharge, really speaking to the climate impacts or the impacts that have been happening in the region, those shocks and stressors. So becomes, when you think of it as a carbon sink, an opportunity for us to really push our targets over the finish line by using those conservation areas. Next slide, please. So that climate pollution reduction grant that we started working on, it is administered, in fact, by the EPA. It's a planning grant. We received $1 million to develop a plan for the MSA with a team we were already working on said, let's just not do it for the Orlando, Kissimmee, Sanford MSA, and let's conduct it for the entire region. So it covered our 8-county region, and we expanded our 2019 baseline greenhouse gas inventory to include additional sectors. We also included air pollution. And like I said, we were able to incorporate these other areas. Those key deliverables that are required through this grant as paying for it is a priority climate action plan, which was due and submitted in March of 2024. And that really was a significant opportunity. At that time, the Biden administration set aside funding for implementation grants, of which we submitted several grants across the state to bring in additional funds for implementation. Unfortunately, the state of Florida was not included and did not get any of those projects funded at that time. So in December 2025, which is just one short month, less than a month from now, we will be submitting our comprehensive climate action plan, which is the integrated plan we're here to discuss today. We will continue that work over the next 2 years and do a status report or figure out how are we going to stay on top of these. And we had expanded it, like I'd mentioned, to additional sectors. Next slide, please. The overall outcomes from the grant program is really to reduce pollution, reduce vulnerability, and then increase resilience and sustainability efforts across the region. Next slide. To dive into the risk and social vulnerability portion of the plan. So go ahead and hit advance, please. So within the risk assessment that was being worked on with the majority of emergency management directors, really focusing on that discipline for a moment, our risk assessment was designed in such a way where it was approached from an all hazards perspective. We tasked the directors to come up with a comprehensive understanding or what our definition was or our equation was for a risk assessment. They identified that and we were able to pull out of those just those hazards or threats, if you will, that are meteorologically influenced, and those became our climate sensitive hazards. So the ones that we are focusing on in this plan are hurricanes and tropical storms, flooding, all forms of flooding, heat, drought, wildfire, and severe storms. So within the plan, next slide, you'll see an example of really what the risk assessment looks like in the long run. So we defined what that threat or hazard is based on literature and BEMA and what the Florida DEM defines the threats as. So the hurricanes and tropical storms are really wind driven. So you'll see for within this plan, we really pulled out 57% of land area were in the medium high hurricane risk, wind risk category. And we've done that for each and every hazard. So really understanding the land coverage area that had or that is in medium high or high in each area. So you see on the map to the right of the screen, it's not only we've spatially organized it so we can recognize where these impacts are occurring based on historical data, but understand who is impacted by a set of social vulnerability indicators that we look at that take the CDC's indicators, which they use about 15, and we've expanded it working with SOVI and University of Central Florida to incorporate 31 different indicators. So next slide, please. Heat, here's another example. Heat is really interesting. So again, it is defined. We do incorporate and help people understand what does this threat mean. In this threat category, it's fascinating. The heat, as you can imagine, works from inland and gets cooler as you hit the coastal communities because of the ocean breezes. So 44% of our region, or a little over 44%, is in a high threat hazard category. Of course, Sumter County is almost 98% in a high heat category, and Volusia and Brevard are greater than the land coverage, are in a medium hazard threat category. But when you dive into some of the Department of Health data or indicators that we had pulled out and incorporated into the risk assessment, you really start uncovering a very people-focused indicator. 14 fatalities occurred in each county on average in Volusia and Brevard County, which are those coastal communities, as compared to 8 fatalities per inland county. Of course, no fatalities is okay to have somebody suffer from a heat stroke or anything like that. And same with injuries. Brevard and Volusia County had significantly higher injuries than they did for those inland communities. So it really tells a little bit different of a story. Next slide. I'll go ahead and hand it over. I think the we've engaged our board throughout, and one of the things I wanted to communicate as our board has come along with us in the structure of how we've worked on this over the last several years. You saw starting back in 2019 when we defined what the climate action plan was going to look like. Our board has been engaged throughout, really driving and gaining an understanding in each one of these sections and categories of the way. And just yesterday, they had approved the completion of this document to be sent, and adopted the document to be sent forward to EPA in December for their complete review. So it's wonderful news. And with that, I will hand it over to Adrian Leithhead, who has done majority of the modeling and data gathering and completion of this portion. Adrian?
Hi, my name is Adrian Leithhead. I'm going to talk a bit about the greenhouse gas inventory and kind of the pathways and kind of modeling that we've kind of undertaken. So really this kind of steps into that kind of next piece of the puzzle, kind of like once we understand the risks within the region, is kind of really to look at where kind of emissions are coming from. This is done through a greenhouse gas inventory, which can be thought of as a carbon footprint report for the community. Essentially accounting for a kind of exercise that helps us measure what greenhouse gas emissions we're putting into the atmosphere over a year period and where these emissions are coming from, whether it's cars on the road, electricity used to cool and power our buildings and homes, waste sent to landfills, wastewater, clearing land for development, kind of all of those different pieces. It really tells us what we're emitting and where those emissions are originating from and how much we're producing. So how does that kind of really inform the regional integrated climate action plan? It's a kind of crucial step because you can't manage what you don't measure. It acts as an initial blueprint for action and how we can track progress. So as we can see in the chart on the screen on the slide, essentially building energy is the largest contributor, which is as a result of the amount of energy consumed by buildings and homes, and also how that energy is generated, whether it's being generated by coal power plants, gas power plants, clean energy, nuclear, renewables, all of those different pieces of the puzzle, and how much of that we're using kind of formulates that building energy. The next piece is really the transportation piece, is the next biggest piece, which really is a slight difference to many other regions in the country where transportation is typically the largest sector, whereas in our region here in East Central Florida, transportation forms the kind of second largest piece. And that's mostly made up from kind of on-road vehicles, so kind of your diesel, gasoline vehicles, all of that kind of buses, all of anything that's kind of traveling about, as well as a smaller portion related to kind of equipment and construction equipment and off-road vehicles as well. The kind of following that, the kind of next kind of piece that is the largest part is the kind of industrial processes and product use. And this section, the main contributor to that part is actually kind of the hydrofluorocarbons, fluorinated gases, which what that means is essentially kind of your refrigerant that's in kind of your AC systems, all of those sorts of gases which have although we're kind of small in volume in terms of the actual gas itself, they're very potent in their properties to kind of warm the atmosphere. So a small amount of that kind of refrigerant release through leaks, for example, when your air conditioning has a leak, that will escape into the atmosphere, and actually that small amount of gas has a much larger impact on kind of trapping heat in the atmosphere as opposed to kind of the same volume of carbon dioxide, for example. Following that, kind of agriculture, forestry, and other land use. So this is kind of like you're essentially clearing land for development, kind of cutting down your trees. Also kind of agriculture in terms of livestock, crop forming, and a large piece of the agriculture is from cattle in the region, from kind of enteric fermentation and kind of manure management as well. So if you go on to the next slide. So the kind of inventory that you've just seen is our 2019 baseline inventory, which is kind of essentially a line in the sand that we can then measure from and can use as a baseline starting point. We then also carry out this inventory every 3 years. So 2022 is the next year that we've completed recently. And you can see on the screen kind of a comparison between the baseline 2019 inventory and the most recent 2022 inventory. So we can see kind of from this, the kind of there has been a decrease in the building energy kind of sector. This is mostly, we believe, is from kind of the electricity grid becoming slightly greener and slightly cleaner. So there was between 2019 and 2022, there was a kind of increase in cleaner energy. So which was mostly from solar adoption. So kind of your solar on your houses and also kind of utility solar parks as well from the utility providers have been bringing online. And then there was also a kind of a decrease in kind of transportation emissions on kind of the on-road piece, which mainly came from kind of your kind of increase in remote working following the pandemic, kind of that change of kind of work practices where more people are kind of working from home or remotely, having business meetings over online rather than going in person, and also kind of an increase to kind of low and zero emission vehicles as well. We can also see kind of the kind of dark green section on the top has also increased a little bit as well, which is unfortunately due to kind of more kind of land clearance, more kind of clearance of trees essentially, and kind of development of kind of those kind of lands, converting it from forests or grassland and trees, clearing that land and then building on that kind of process of cutting the trees and the biomass down releases carbon into the atmosphere, and then also kind of going on from that, as a result of that, you then also lose the ability to capture carbon through those trees as well. And then essentially from kind of next year, our big task is essentially then looking at doing the next inventory, which is the 2025 inventory. So we'll be sending out kind of data requests out in the kind of springtime next year to then collate all of the information from the year that we're currently in, to then kind of to conduct the kind of third inventory so that we can then track kind of these emissions over time. And then as we move through the years, essentially, we can then hopefully see what kind of impact some of the activities and changes that are happening in the community are having on those emissions. So kind of this graph on the screen now kind of shows how we then kind of the next step of the process, which is essentially kind of how do we want to influence these, what goals, what targets do we want to have. So through various kind of committee work and sub-council committee work, we essentially established a long-term target of kind of science-based target reduction of 90% reduction from our 2019 baseline. So that's why it's important to have that inventory so that we have something to measure from by kind of 2050. And then we also saw, given that we're in 25 already, and kind of 2030 is fast approaching, was more kind of that linear progression towards that long-term goal. So setting a kind of an interim near-term target of reducing the emissions by around 40% as a target goal. So kind of what we then do from this is kind of starting to look towards our projections and pathways. So how do we use kind of what we've measured, what we kind of targeted to reduce, and how do we kind of move forward from that? So essentially, we've established the baseline. We've kind of looked at forecasting the emissions out to 2050 through our kind of business as usual forecasting. And then kind of this is now sort of getting into those modeling tools. What are the kind of levers that we can pull and push to influence the kind of emissions and activities that are happening in the region? So essentially, there's lots of different things that we can do. This is kind of an example of some of the things in kind of building energy. So kind of some of the highlighted ones are kind of increasing clean energy production. We had a lot from our committees and kind of work that we've done with the community, kind of about energy efficiency and kind of reducing that consumption of energy as well through retrofitting of buildings. If you go to the next slide. And then also kind of, again, kind of transportation was a big piece of that as well. So looking at transportation, there's a huge amount of things that you can look at and kind of try and influence. But just to pull out some of the kind of ones that we've kind of been incorporating into the plan is kind of looking at that kind of improving the efficiency of cars. So for example, I think there's a target, a federal target of around having, I think it's like 45 miles to the gallon by sort of around 2030, 2040 period. So having that continued improvement in efficiency of vehicles, using alternative fuels like your biofuels, your compressed natural gas that have lower emissions than your traditional kind of diesel and petrol fuels, and also acknowledging that can be kind of a stepping stone to kind of like longer term looking at kind of having more and more kind of electric, low emission, zero emission vehicles, hydrogen vehicles, all of those things. And then also having kind of your route optimization, so making sure that trucks are kind of not driving around empty, those sorts of things as well. So all of these things kind of are all the myriad of options that we have available to us to then try and formulate into a plan. So what we heard from a lot of our work essentially through developing this plan is really kind of three kind of main areas of kind of consensus that people were very kind of driven to kind of categorize as. So that's the energy piece. So that's kind of like how are we generating energy, how much of energy are we using, which is kind of from that factor that the most emissions are coming from, the majority of the emissions are coming from building energy, looking at kind of how we can make our communities more sustainable and also transportation more sustainable, how we move around between those buildings. That was another important piece because I know, for example, that also has impacts on traffic levels and also how people can access different facilities around the region. And then also the third piece is kind of that agriculture, land use, natural systems, making sure that the natural environment that we have is we can use those systems for good. For example, there's ecosystem services, which will come on to kind of links in that conservation piece. And kind of really kind of rounds that off as a kind of a truly integrated climate action plan. So if we go to the next slide. So this is a kind of essentially a slide showing all of the different options and things that we've kind of modeled and grouped together. So you can see kind of all the blue wedge is kind of the reductions that we can potentially achieve through altering our kind of energy production, kind of moving away from natural gas as the predominant fuel source of electricity, having buildings more efficient, kind of having more efficient systems, having more efficient retrofitting, kind of reducing that consumption element. kind of yellow portion above that is kind of all about your sustainable community and transportation. So how do we kind of have cleaner ways of moving about the communities, how we can kind of improve efficiencies of those vehicles, how we can use transit as well, develop transit and have those kind of low impact and transit oriented developments so that people can a best place to use those transit systems. And then also kind of how we can reduce our waste kind of production, kind of diverting that waste away from landfills through recycling and composting, for example, and kind of also acknowledging also other factors within that are affecting the region, such as the kind of federal EPA kind of restrictions and progression of reducing the kind of impact of those hydrofluorocarbon regulations. So if you, for example, if you've got an older AC system, the refrigerant gas that's used in that will have more of an impact if it's released, whereas newer systems are now having to use a different type of gas that has a lower impact. And so really a lot of these myriad of things that we've kind of grouped together and tried to describe as kind of technology neutral, so that we kind of not focusing on one, putting all of our eggs into one technology basket. And we also acknowledges and accepts that new technologies will come online as we progress through the years, really. So kind of just to zoom in on kind of some of those pieces that we've built up from. So essentially this kind of looks at kind of that energy production piece. So kind of really the behavior change that we really want to do is to kind of diversify our energy sources. So some of the strategies, as you can see on screen, are what we've kind of gone into the plan. So kind of increasing solar installations, distributed generation solution, the grid reliability. And you can see on the pie chart on the right, this isn't just things that we're trying to kind of progress. This is actually stuff that is already happening in the region. So we can see in 2019, the blue part and the black part is your kind of natural gas and coal. So for example, our electricity is majority, 78% is produced by natural gas. So it's a very kind of subject to any kind of volatility that happens with natural gas prices or natural gas availability. There's a very kind of risk to having that as fueling 78% of the region's electricity production. We can see kind of 2022, we can see that reduction in coal, which is kind of reducing the emissions of the grid. And we can see that the kind of green parts is kind of, and the yellow part is kind of that ever increasing part of solar. So that just kind of initial increase in that production. And then 2030 shows kind of the 10-year site plan. So this is kind of what utilities have been willing to put pen to paper on and say what they are kind of wanting to do. And that really does increase this kind of solar portion and reducing that dependence on natural gas. And this doesn't actually go as far as the utilities want to go, as they also express within their own goals and plans that they actually want to make that 2030 bar chart kind of the renewable portion, that top portion, as kind of around 50%. So this is stuff that is happening within the region. Utility providers are kind of looking towards having that diversification of energy sources, so that not one, no one source is relied upon to produce the electricity. And essentially that kind of helps the region, and kind of promoting that solar piece also promotes that kind of reduction in emissions. So this kind of next kind of flow chart essentially shows all of the pieces of that kind of behavior change puzzle and what we're trying to influence. So we can see through this example is kind of trying to encourage people from, rather than driving, to shifting them to doing cycling. So we can see on the right those outcomes of kind of those benefits that not just reduce emissions, it can have reduced pollution, kind of reduced noise, reduced road maintenance savings, reduced healthcare costs. All of those things can be kind of co-benefits of this action. Moving to the left-hand side, we can see those interventions and attributes. So these are the types of things that kind of local governments and companies and different policies and projects can influence. essentially having kind of all-weather cycle pathing, dynamic traffic lights, increased peak hour charges, or reduced speed zones, having those bike lanes. That all kind of makes things safer, making it more inviting for people to make that behavior change because it's safer, it's more convenient, it's more healthier or more affordable to make that change and encourage that behavior change and that activity shift. So this kind of just really kind of tries to illustrate that it is quite a complex piece that we're trying to achieve, but there's all these different kind of levers to kind of pull and push to try and influence how people are, what the choices people are making in how they move about the region, or how much energy they're kind of consuming. So go to the next slide. So kind of switching back to kind of energy. So looking at the kind of energy consumption piece. So we've already talked about kind of how we're generating the electricity. Another important piece of that is also how much we're consuming. So we can kind of essentially what we're kind of looking at is having reduced consumption, which increases kind of long-term savings and health and convenience. So being able to have a better environment within your house through kind of efficiency of systems means that you can use less energy to achieve the same conditions. And essentially this kind of just pulls out some of those strategies and actions that have gone into the plan, for example, reducing soft costs, accelerating those kind of building energy efficiency and weatherization programs, having kind of those tools, standards and policies and programs to have kind of energy toolkits to reduce energy consumption, and kind of promote kind of audits on to help people understand how much energy they're using and different areas of where they can kind of reduce that consumption to help them. Go to the next slide. And then, as we mentioned, as Jennifer mentioned as well, that kind of third piece is kind of like our conservation strategy. So this is work, as Jennifer mentioned, has been carried out across the region. This, for example, is a map of Seminole County. Essentially, it's a heat map that kind of weighs acquisition costs, environmental features, connectivity between conservation areas, that prioritizes additional areas for conservation and prioritizes those ecosystem services that those kind of committees and workshop groups have prioritized of kind of the land, what they're kind of wanting from, what they can see that are the benefits of keeping that land in conservation, whether it's through mitigation of flooding or increase in kind of health of people being able to walk around parks and things, having that natural environment there. So essentially what we did is took that piece of work, fed that into our climate action plan and converted that and to be able to look at kind of measure those kind of emissions. So we looked at kind of the current land use, what the land is currently used at, looked at kind of what the future land use is. So essentially what kind of, if things were left to kind of run their course, essentially what that potentially could look like over time, what those designations are for the future. And then also looked at this kind of Mark-Sam modeling conservation piece of saying, okay, these are all the high priority areas that would be most beneficial use of resources to conserve. And then, okay, look at those kind of that versus the future land use to see what land is being conserved that would have otherwise been developed. And from that, we can kind of establish what kind of emissions that would save and kind of the increase into the kind of maintenance of that carbon sink as well. And that's how we can kind of feed that into the climate action plan, into that baseline inventory, and look at how we can kind of track and measure that moving forward, whilst encapsulating all of those important features of the natural environment. So this kind of slide, again, kind of just pulls out some of the kind of strategies and actions that the kind of our committee workers come up with to kind of really advance that nature-based solutions piece of the puzzle, and to really kind of promote that conservation piece. So that really kind of involves the transitioning of conserving high priority land, reducing the kind of canopy loss, making sure that we're maintaining that canopy cover, which provides shade, provides a myriad of benefits really that are kind of all outlined in the plan, and that really kind of results in a better, more healthier environment, and enables kind of people to access those green spaces and enjoy them. Next slide. So really that's the risk, how we've kind of measured what risk is to the community, how we're kind of measuring the emissions, how we're kind of using that baseline, how we're kind of wanting to move forward, and kind of those pathways to reduce those emissions and encourage those activity shifts. So now Marie is going to go through kind of how this benefits the community really, and kind of that kind of engagement piece.
Thank you, Adrian. So yes, we wanted to make sure that the recap is as useful and implementable and serving our communities as possible. So every step of the way in developing the plan, we engaged with our communities, partners, stakeholders, and residents. Next slide, Ken. So for one, the existing R2C steering committee consisting of multidisciplinary partners from across the region and the council subcommittee consisting of ECF RPC leadership met and were updated on the plan regularly and made the recommendations necessary to get it all the way up to the council board for approval. There's also a CPRG committee of city and county partners from the Orlando-Sanford Kissimmee MSA that was formed and met monthly for focused discussion updates, and specialized greenhouse gas inventory and risk and vulnerability technical advisory committees convened as well to lend their expertise and input. The feedback from all of these committees directly shaped the strategies and actions that were included in the plan. To complement the strategies and actions as we were releasing them, we developed and hosted a free webinar series on emission reducing actions titled Driving Change. This was in collaboration with subject matter experts from the Florida Solar Energy Center and Space Coast Transportation Planning Organization. These webinars were targeted at local policymakers, professionals, and interested community members and covered topics such as the regional greenhouse gas inventory, transportation plans and programs that reduce vehicle miles traveled, alternative fuels, and facility energy saving assessments and improvements. The final step was to conduct more targeted community outreach and engagement. So 2 community-based nonprofit organizations within the MSA received mini grants from the ECF RPC over the last few months to collect specific community perspectives, needs, and challenges surrounding pollution and emissions impacts. These organizations work closely with us to ensure that community priorities were accurately represented throughout the recap by hosting 20 community listening sessions, collecting hundreds of bilingual surveys in Spanish and English, and knocking on thousands of doors, all in identified low-income disadvantaged census tracts in Orange and Osceola County. Next slide. So the main idea behind the community outreach was for residents to identify barriers to emissions reducing behavior change and propose solutions that would work for them. So some of the key takeaways here focus on transportation, green spaces, walkability and public health, and energy affordability. I'll touch on a bit these 4 main points. So across demographics, residents identified transportation access as a critical issue. Limited, unreliable, and costly systems were seen as barriers to education and employment opportunities, healthcare, and civic participation. Residents want to see investments that focus on expanding routes to underserved neighborhoods, increase ride frequency and reliability, and improve accessibility for seniors, those with disabilities, and low-income riders. By making transit options more convenient and affordable, communities can reduce dependence on personal vehicles, therefore lowering greenhouse gas emissions, poor air quality due to smog, and traffic congestion. Parks and green spaces were seen as not just amenities, but essential gathering places that nurture culture, health, and community. Additionally, planting more shade trees and expanding green buffers near busy roads can improve comfort and walkability and absorb air pollution, improving the air quality for everyone breathing the air in that community. Nearly every community that was canvassed requested safer streets, working street lights, speed bumps, and better walkability. Lack of infrastructure such as sidewalks, bike lanes, proper stormwater drainage, and shaded and walkable parks are limiting mobility, especially for children, older adults, and residents without cars, which was about 9% of respondents. So you can see some of those barriers referenced in the bar chart below, with lack of crosswalks and sidewalks being identified as the biggest challenge that makes it difficult for people to use alternative transport and everyone having to resort to personal vehicles instead. So addressing these issues could directly improve long-term health and quality of life for residents. Oh, there was one more bullet. Sorry. Many families are facing unsustainable energy costs, with over half of households canvass paying over $200 a month in their energy bills. So we really need to collaborate with local utility providers to expand equitable access to solar incentives, educate residents on money saving assistance and efficiency programs, and invest in community solar and weatherization programs to reduce these burdensome energy costs for residents. Next slide. So to tie all this together, many processes that emit greenhouse gases also emit a variety of air pollutants. Carbon monoxide, ozone, lead, particulate matter, and precursors to particulate matter, such as sulfur dioxide and nitrogen dioxide, are regulated by the EPA under the Clean Air Act to protect public health from the harmful effects of air pollution. So in our Regional Integrated Climate Action Plan, we also included some of these common air pollutants associated with harmful respiratory and cardiovascular effects in a co-pollutant inventory and benefits analysis. Implementation of the measures, strategies, and actions outlined in the recap will therefore decrease co-pollutant emissions in addition to the greenhouse gas emissions. The benefits of reducing co-pollutants are felt very locally and present valuable health and economic benefits to our region, such as reduced cardiac effects, respiratory systems, asthma attacks, doctor, hospital, and ER visits, and ultimately deaths. In turn, that means less days of school and work being lost due to health reasons, and overall results in a healthier and more productive economy. So I will hand it over to Luis now, who's going to talk more about the economic and workforce impacts of the recap.
Thank you, Marie. So let's talk about when the Biden administration originally created this program. One of the goals was actually to be able to connect certain populations to the new jobs that will be created by the green economy. So we have several goals for this project. Go to the next slide. So what I wanted to do, we have three main things we wanted to focus on. One, we wanted to understand what is the current state of the green industries in Central Florida. Second, we were going to prepare an occupational analysis on the green economy. And third, which is probably the most important part, is how we're going to type those investments that are probably being made with the pick-up stakeholders, and how those investments will basically affect workforce development. Go to the next one. So what we actually tried to look for what will be the framework to start a project. Everybody has a very definition what a green industry is. So we decided to focus on framework created by the Brookings Institute back in 2019. So the Brookings divided like the clean energy sectors into three main buckets, all of the individual next industries. So we have the clean energy production. This is actually a sector, of course, mainly companies that kind of work in some sort of like clean energy production, like solar, for example. Then we have energy efficiency. These are industries that mostly encompass those that actually work in kind of building more and retrofit like structures to be more efficient. And when it comes to environmental management is usually more like government positions. When we actually use this framework, now go back, Clean. I want to talk about the map. So the map you see here on your right was actually, we were able, using this framework and the next codes that were provided, to identify about over like almost 80 companies across the region that are involved in some sort of like green industry sector. As you can see from the blue, most of them are actually within the energy efficiency sector. These are usually your installers of solar energy, because most of them are considered construction trade contractors. And you can see some green, especially in the coast. Emergency management, we do have a robust system when it comes to working with turbines. Those are probably going to be in the triangles that are kind of orange in there. I'll go to the next one. So this is very important to understand how we look like, because based on the previous analysis, it seems we're not a large manufacturing region. And the way that Brookings actually define a lot of these green sectors, a lot of them limit themselves to manufacturing. In Central Florida, biggest industry is actually leisure and hospitality. And because we have a very strong leisure and hospitality industry, we have a lot of companies within construction trades. So that posed a problem with us, because then on the other hand was like, we knew that we had the theme parks and we had other industries, and sometimes these establishments do hire people that actually work on like an environmental sort of like green occupations. So what we decided to do is actually do what is called like an occupational analysis. Very important here, industries are defined by the processes and the products they produce. Jobs are defined very differently. It's mainly based on the skills that the worker has and the tasks that they're performed by the worker. So this is a whole different. So that means, for example, if you have like a customer service in person, that customer service person may actually be working in like a green industry, but they will still be considered a customer service person. So the problem we have here is that when we are trying to look at occupations, we use what is called the standard occupational classification system. And it divides occupations about 21 occupational groups. And from there, you're actually going to be able to sort of ascertain who works there. But when it comes to the green, there's not really a good definition of what a green occupation is. Other companies like Chomra, they have done their own analysis based on what they've done is that they actually, this SOC codes are usually 6-digit codes. And they actually been like perusing through a lot of the job ads that have been posted for different employers, and they kind of like use this information to develop their own definitions. So for example, you have an SOC 113051. That's usually called an industrial production manager. These are the people who usually work in the managing the processes in a plant. So that could be any job. But when you got the SOC, you have what is called a biofuels production manager. What they did is that they added as a 0.03. So they added 2 more codes. And based on that, they started identifying what were the green occupations, because you have a 0.05, you have a maintenance landfill gas collection system operator. So these are 2 green occupations, but they're all kind of hidden within the industrial production manager. What I found out during this like research was that even though we sort of have defined, some occupations have defined a number of green occupations, the numbers were actually pretty much the same as what the regular like numbers were. For example, let me give you. So we have a customer service operators. There were about 34,000 of people working in this occupation within the region. So when we look at what the definition for the green occupation, the report actually gave us the exact same 34,000 positions. So we know that was an issue. So we had to be very creative how we're going to try to estimate who was actually working in a green occupation. So go to the next slide, Ken. So what we did was actually, we looked at the occupation we had, and we started looking at those clean energy sectors that Brookings have defined. An electrician can work in many different type of industries. Like for example, there are theme parks that will hire electricians to assist them with the rides. But all those electricians actually work with a green sector. You cannot claim that. So let's say, for example, that we have about 30,000 electricians in the region. So what we did after we had what is called a job industry matrix. So after that, the number of electricians working within the industry sector went from 30,000 all the way to about 14,000, for example, which is less than half. And we know we have, for example, 5,000 on clean energy production, 7,000 on energy efficiency, and 2,000 environmental management. Now, these are examples that were made for this specific slide. This is not what we actually found for electricians, but it was a good way. I just wanted you to understand what was the framework we followed when we were trying to identify these occupations. Go to the next one. So what were the largest occupations? Like I said, we are not a large manufacturing region. Except for maybe our two coastal counties, we're still pretty much leisure and hospitality and construction. So a lot of the occupations we had were actually with the construction trades. If you look at anything with clean energy production, you have construction laborers, which also were the ones in energy efficiency. These usually are your low education, low skill type of worker. This is kind of like an entry level position when you're trying to get in construction. A lot of them just clean the sites, for example. So when we were farther ahead in clean energy production, we have power line installers and software developers. Energy efficiency, we have competent electricians. And environmental management, which includes many different industries, we have operation managers, material collectors, and customer service representatives. Go to the next one. We also look what we decided to do, because the original idea behind this economic plan was to actually try to link the gaps in these occupations with underserved populations. Those are populations that actually have, for some reason, generationally, they have not been able to get what I call the good jobs. So what we did, we actually analyzed some of these top occupations, both by sex and by race and ethnicity. So when we look at these occupations and we look, for example, at sex, we notice that most of them are very geared towards male. And this is very important because, and I explain to this to my students all the time. The United States has a high level of occupational segregation. And usually you see that by sex and you see that by race and ethnicity. So this is just showing patterns. It's not going to tell you that some females are not going to become software developers. No, that's not what it's telling you. But you understand that if there's such a little number of them, you have to understand that there might be barriers for them to actually enter into that profession. Go to the next one. So we also see the same with like race and ethnicity. As you can see, most of these occupations are actually mostly led by white people. Then you have probably the only two that are not are software developers and electrical and electromechanical equipment assemblers. Again, what we want to do with a plan like this one, and we want to move these ideas forward, is try to identify what are the actual barriers for other groups to be able to enter into these occupations. Next, from the next one. So after we did this analysis, the final part was actually going and doing some outreach. And the idea here is always really good. I love doing data analysis, but it's important to bring our data into context. So what we tried to do is to actually have I had conversations with a couple of groups within the region, most of them economic development or workforce development groups in the region. And just to start a conversation, what did they see was the future of green careers in Central Florida? What we had is that a lot of them were talking about industries like energy storage, material science, AI applications for utilities, mechanical and thermomechanical systems. It's usually mainly for the turbines. And there's a lot of interest in agri-tech. But what we found out when we did this out, which is really interesting, is that a lot of the efforts right now in our region are more geared toward kind of the environmental high-tech occupations or industries rather than looking at the construction trade, which will actually are probably the occupations that have the highest growth potential. Go to the next one. We finally decided to actually go in and take at least one of the points from the plan and try to understand what will be the economic impact and what will the impact on professions. So the policy we decided to look was like we're trying to look, one of the goals we have is that at least 40% of the region's housing units will be retrofitted by 2030. We estimate that that's about almost 800,000 units across the region, which is a lot. And the cost we're estimating at that point was about $15,500, almost $16,000, we want to say. So we basically put that into the REMI model. What we found out is that this type of investment has a really important effect in the economy. We are talking that there's potential to create about 33,000 new jobs. And also you will have about a little more than $5 billion, trillion dollars in output. Same about like 2 trillion for 2.2 trillion for personal income. And what we really want to do, which is the value added activity of the gross domestic product, it was about an average of about like 3 trillion annually. So again, this could have a really, really big investment. But when we look at the actual, go to the next slide. What we actually look at the occupational groups that will benefit in the most. And this is very important that the largest group we had was construction and extraction. Those are, again, those construction and trade industries that we talked about before. And it's because that's where we're adding the money in actually retrofitting a lot of those buildings. There's definitely a lot of the other, this is occupational groups. Some of them are combined. So some of the knowledge for sales related and management, they're actually combining occupational groups. So they look much bigger than they really are. So, but again, when we are actually thinking about green employment, we need to start having the conversation about how we are going to train those construction workers with the skills and to help them learn the technology they're going to need to use so we can actually have a more of a green future than we had before. So these are some findings and recommendations. Again, green jobs are not always high-tech jobs. And I personally, through my work in economic development, I will keep pushing that idea. We also definitely need to develop a more stronger relationship between the people looking for resilience and the job training organizations. There seems to be some disconnect. In our region right now, a lot of the work that's been done is been done for the semiconductor industry. And yes, some of that will help the economy, but it's not the end to be all, the reality. We need to start promoting green construction technologies among our training providers. And that's something that we're going to be focusing, my team, economic development team, is going to be focused in the next couple of years. So I'm going to lead you, I guess Jennifer's going to talk about the next steps.
Sure. Thanks, Luis. So go ahead and you can advance to the last slide, just as a recap. So you can see throughout each one of the sections, if you will, it's about a 200-page document that we are on tap to push and deliver to the EPA. On this first day of the COP starting in Brazil, we are pleased that we have put together a truly integrated plan, not only looking at the economic development opportunities and the jobs that will be created from making these types of investment, but actually getting to the co-benefit of reducing emissions heavily in our region. Like I mentioned earlier on the call, our East Central Florida Regional Planning Council Board unanimously adopted the document as it exists today and adopted it to transmit to EPA by its December 1st deadline. We will be sending it and waiting for response or feedback from the EPA whenever the government gets back up and running. And then the final version of it will be delivered and presented at the upcoming leadership summit for the Resilience Collaborative, titled The Art of What's Next, in February. If you can advance to that last slide. We'd love to see you all there and really have a great lineup of speakers and engagement that'll be happening across the 2 days. It's going to be in the city of New Smyrna Beach at the Brennan Center. And at this point, Luis, I'll hand it back to you and see if there are any questions. We would encourage you all to either put your questions in the Q&A button, or would love to see some of the faces that are on the call today, and we can have certainly some dialogue through the question and answer period. Thank you. Luis, I'll hand it back to you.
My apologies. Yes, I'm not seeing any questions in the chat right now, so I'm gonna go in and see if we can go and ask some questions we had before. Just need to find it really quick. So one question that I do have is, what do you see actually being, once the plan is approved, what do you see as is going to be the main strategy you feel you feel that your group is going to be focusing on in the next probably 1 or 2 years?
I'll politely ask Adrian to fill in what I don't answer, but ideally at this point, this has been 5 years in the making, and as we had mentioned earlier, so we're going to continue to engage our partners. And then we have a document that we lovingly call our policy tracker. So any type of policy program or opportunity for implementation funding, we'll be trying to pull those dollars into the region to implement projects, and then continue to track them throughout the 2-year period as that final, and included in the final status report. I can let you know with each, you guys are all engaged in watching the news. Seems like every 3 days there's another significant announcement in the region, or an opening of a new thing that directly contributes to emissions reducing activities in the region. 2 days ago, the Amway Center, or it might be called, I'm sorry, the Kia Center, where the Magic Play just had announced they are going to be fully supported through renewable energy. So it's items like that we'll be pulling in and incorporating and tracking over time. Similarly, expansion of the Sunrail, that will be something we keep our eyes on and contribute to that conversation. Any type of those projects or programs. So we'll be keeping our eyes and our engagement up with our partners, tracking those over time, conducting, as Adrian mentioned earlier, the 2025 inventory, and then starting to do some comparisons across those 3 years, 3 different inventories, that we've had, and finding where we're having some success and where we need to make continued investment.
I would just add as well, we'll be kind of continuing our kind of work with the committees and the different representatives from the counties and cities around the region, kind of really kind of like Jennifer said, kind of tracking those projects and policies that they're kind of working towards. And that's really important as well, because as a kind of regional body, we can bring those people together, start comparing what people are doing similarly, because a lot of different organizations, different counties, cities are doing similar things and pushing a lot of these kind of core principles forward. And kind of most of these things are happening. It's just kind of connecting those dots together, kind of sharing that knowledge, sharing those kind of key kind of impacts of those policies and programs, seeing where there might be some gaps that we can help with to kind of push forward kind of the different kind of plans and kind of transitions within the plan that we've written up, to kind of like really just share that knowledge, share the kind of policy and programs and the good work that everyone's doing, and seeing how we can kind of help and progress that forward, whilst also kind of doing that kind of continuous tracking, to then kind of monitor those things, monitor what worked well, what didn't work well, do we need to kind of adjust anything. This kind of document is kind of going to be a kind of living document as we work through the future. So kind of as we move through things, see what works well, what didn't, we can kind of make those adjustments and kind of be in that continuous kind of touch base with the counties and cities and different bodies across the region.
Yeah, kind of related with that. It's just that I always said, and I always brag for all of you, and I always say we have one of the most successful collaborators in the state of Florida. I always said that your team has done an amazing job, and I don't have any problem telling everyone that. But we understand our role as planning councils. We take ideas and we take best practices, and we try to help local governments and organizations adopt them. And their collaborative has been extremely successful in getting a lot of partners to join. But we have about 78 municipalities, and we're not really a regulatory body anymore. What are the carrots that we're kind of dangling for local governments to make sure that they adopt the plan and the goals of the plan, and make sure that a lot of these investments become real, basically?
Yeah, well, so I think at any given opportunity, we're trying to bring training and realization to what the benefits of all of some of the actions and strategies that are in with plan can bring into light. I'll give you an example, and I had mentioned it yesterday when we were talking with our board. The Neo City Academy, which is located in Neo City in Osceola County, implemented or built the first high-performance net zero energy public school in the state of Florida. 45,000 square foot building, $112,000 every year of energy cost savings put forth by not only the design and the construction materials utilized, but by the 650 panel, 227 kilowatt solar PV array that sits in and around that property. So I think when you see, or you can realize as not only a local government, but an organization or a Kia center or whatever it might be, there are real cost savings and efficiencies and effectiveness of governance structures by implementing some of these items that we've incorporated into the plan. It'll encourage that next step to be taken, and that next step will encourage the next step to be taken. And we try to lay out a pathway that would make sense for any community or any organization, whatever stage they are in, to look at that and then take the first step or dip their toe in the pool even for some of these emission reducing activities and strategies we've laid out. Regional planning councils, we don't have regulatory authority, but what we do have a lot of benefit and opportunity to do within all of the people that we come into contact with across this very large region. We have the capability of taking these somewhat obscure ideas or concepts that our partners will bring to it, or we'll have in conversation, or we'll hear out at a meeting, and then we're able to figure out out ways to operationalize those, not only within our organization and really figuring out through pilots and other things how this could work, how can we make it better and strengthen it, and then take that idea towards implementation and eventually, hopefully, pulling capital into the region to build or implement that project and move it forward. And we've done it time and time again through a number of different partnerships through the various organizations that we work with. So we have, I kind of say, somewhat the luxury of kind of sitting and hovering at this 30,000 foot level, and then have the depth and partnerships to make it happen on the ground for the partners that are truly engaged in each one of these steps that we've been able to pull together. Not only the collaborative, which is just one small program within the entire planning council, but throughout each with each department that we have, where we've been able to integrate resilience and sustainability standards into each one of our programs.
Thank you all for joining in. And if you have any questions about any of our programs, you can always go in and email us at info@ecfrpc.org. We make sure we look at this email frequently, so we make sure that somebody answers the questions. But that's at 3:48 today, and we definitely, again, thank you everybody, but I think we're ready to say goodbye for this year, and we'll see you again in 2026, hopefully.